game theoretic models. Who has seen the movie called A Beautiful Mind? Raise your hand and let me see. Who has seen that movie? A Beautiful Mind. A Beautiful Mind. No? Go and watch that movie called A Beautiful Mind. John Nash, 1951, the Nash Equilibrium. Okay, the guy was a smart guy. Go and watch The Beautiful Mind. Okay, it's a very nice movie. And the topic we're looking at is game theory. I'm just going to give you the basics of game theory, not the super difficult part of game theory. So this will be scratching the surface of game theory. But game theory is a whole module. In fact, it's even a whole specialization on its own. And that is where you do details of game theory. But what we're going to do is we're going to just look at the basics of the game theory and the application. Because in real life, running a business is like a football game. It's like a chess game. The object of the game is to achieve an optimal outcome. You want to score a goal. You can play the best of the game. If you don't score a goal, it's not seen as really good. But unlike normal football games, soccer and all that, okay, the best outcome does not always mean that your opponent will lose. Both of you can win in this game theory, and you're going to see this. Especially, you're going to realize that if you cooperate, you will do better than if you don't cooperate. In order to understand a game theory, let's define it. It is one particular branch of economics, the micro part of economics, that will use some mathematical models to analyze competitive behaviors, where players, rational players, they decide strategically. They interact strategically. The strategy game, okay, originated in the work of Borrell in 1921 and John von Neumann in 1928. So game theory, basically game theory is adapting the theoretical and the mathematical models to solving or to analyzing the behavior of players, people. And you can apply it. Okay? It is a game. When you're trying to woo a lady, it's a game. It's a game when you're determining the price and quantity of a commodity. It's a game. It's a game when you're playing a chess. It's a game going to watch a movie, deciding whether to go and watch a movie or not. It's a game. It's a game. Whether you want to eat this food or that food is a game. It is a game. Because at any point in time, there is a competition between players, between firms, between decision makers, where strategic behavior plays a key role. It's a game. Now, I want you to look at this game on your screen. Look at the game very well. It's not a joke at all. So many things are happening in that game. Have you observed that? Stop looking at the people who have pot belly in the game. And stop looking at the people that you are looking at and watch the game. In this game, you will notice that, have you realized that sometimes when you're playing games like this, the people who are not playing the game are the ones who can see the tricks and the strategies in the game? Have you observed that? That is why the coach of a football match should not be the one playing the game. When you are outside the game, you appear to see more of the game than when you are inside the game. You realize that? Yeah.
Yes, Doc.
Exactly. So you can see clearly that people, brains are at work. Look at the background. The background, somebody has put his hand on the brain, on the head, thinking. Really thinking, analyzing, meditating. Brains are at work. This is a game. So let's look at two main kinds of games. Non-cooperative games, okay? There are two of them. we're going to look at a game which is called simultaneous move game. It is compared to a sequential move game. Now, please note that for this short preamble, I will not teach you the details of the sequential move game, but a bigger form of game theory will do that. Sequential means that this one plays, he holds on, and this one also comes to play. So the players move sequentially, but as simultaneous, they move together. But you see, even though it is called simultaneous, they move together, they do not always move necessarily together. But then, by the time one moves and the other one is about to move, the other one is not aware that the first guy has moved, or he's not aware of the decisions the first guy has taken. And because he's not aware of the decision the first guy has taken, it is as if it is a simultaneous move. Because when the second guy is doing it, because he's not aware, information is asymmetric to him. Okay? That's why we say players have imperfect information. The simultaneous move game is also called the static game. And the way you represent it, the form in which you represent it is known as the normal form, also called a strategic form. You represent it usually using matrices, columns and rows. That's what we'll be doing. But like I said, the sequential is more of a repeated, dynamic, extensive form. So let's look at a practical example. It's a very common example. Real world situations have a lot of applications of it. In the world of duopoly, pricing between Pepsi and Coca-Cola, in the world of used cars transactions, there is this whole application of the prisoner's dilemma. Who can tell me, who can raise a hand and tell me whether or not you know about the prisoner's dilemma? Who has heard of the prisoner's dilemma, by the way? The prisoner's dilemma. Who knows the story? Who knows the story of the prisoner's dilemma? Anybody? Do you know the story of the prisoner's dilemma? Nobody. Okay. So the two prisoners are in a dilemma here. They go and steal. So let me give you the storyline. And I've tweaked it a little bit here. So in a prisoner's dilemma, there are two suspects, Fuseni and Pierre. And these guys have been accused of jointly committing a crime. They have promised, in fact, they did this promise before they even went on the stealing spree. They've always told themselves that nobody should rat on the other. Don't tell them I am with you. And me too, when I'm caught, I will never, I promise, I will never tell them that I know you. So they have given that promise, and that promise is so much like a covenant. And so it's like, it mustn't be broken. They have promised that if you are caught, you will not confess. Now, every one of them, each person is trying to minimize his jail term. And the prosecuting witnesses, you see, if they want to really send them to prison, they need evidence. They need evidence. But as it stands now, there is no evidence that they can use to convict them and sentence them to jail. There's no evidence. So they planned, the prosecution planned that in order to convict them, one of them or both of them must confess. One or both must confess. Now, these guys have been separated in one room and the other is in another room, and no information can pass between them. Now, if neither of them confesses, the prosecutor will be unable to convict them of the crime. And so each suspect will just receive only 1 year jail sentence. Now, 1 year might be quite difficult, but we just use that 1 year, for example. It could have been 0. Okay. But probably they need a concrete evidence to convict them longer. So this is when none of them confesses. But if Hussaini confesses and Chia does not, then Hussaini is going to go free because Hussaini has done the confession and Chia has not, and so Hussaini goes free. Chia now gets 15-year prison sentence. And the same thing will go to the other one. If Chia confesses and Hussaini does not confess, then of course Chia will now get 0 sentence. Hussaini will get 15. Now please note that word 15 is a negative return, negative payoff, negative utility. So 15 here is a kind of a minus 15 because it is something that is not a good thing. It's a negative thing. What about if both of them should confess? That's what they wanted. That's what the prosecutor wanted. If both confess, okay, if both suspects confess, then each one will get an immediate 6-year sentence. And this is used a lot by psychologists in police. Each suspect must decide once under these conditions whether or not to confess. And this is where the conflict of interest situation comes in. And this is what is known as the prisoner's dilemma. Why is it a dilemma? Who can guess? Why is this a dilemma? Anybody has an idea why it is called a dilemma? Why is this prisoner's dilemma called a dilemma? Yes, Maclay.
Yes, it's called a dilemma because at the end of the day, you have to decide which option is best to choose, but it's very difficult to decide since some of the information is not known to the criminals as to which decision to make or not. Whether to confess or not to confess, and which prison terms they face and or not.
Good. Why is it a dilemma? It's a dilemma. Why? Because if one prisoner is going to confess, he doesn't know whether the other will not confess or will confess. You see, if these prisoners had been told, because they have been told that if you confess and your colleague does not, you go scot-free. Now, how does he know that his colleague will confess or will not confess? All right, let's assume that I confess and my colleague doesn't confess. But the question is, how does he know? Okay, but what if I also decide not to confess? If I decide not to confess and my colleague doesn't confess, nobody is going to give us a higher prison sentence. We are just going to get 1 year prison sentence, which is cool. 1 year will just happen right now. We'll be in a Corona period, and by the time we realize Corona is over, and I'm back out. But the question is that if I choose not to confess, am I sure my Hussaini guy, his head, the way his head has been maneuvered, structured alone, I know he's a liar. And Hussaini will be thinking the same thing of Chia, that Chia is the kind of a guy, I know him from birth. He's not truthful. So they have to now decide, but that is the dilemma they are in. Now, in this prisoner's dilemma, I'm going to use some questions to address each part of the topic. Okay. So the first thing that you will know and you need to know is the strategic environment. Find the strategic environment. The strategic environment involves 3 main things. In other words, you've got to identify the players. So let's go to the storyline. Who are the players? You can raise a hand and tell us. Who are the players of this whole scenario? Who or what are the players? And please know, sometimes you have actual names for them. Sometimes you don't have actual names. So there will be something like player 1 and player 2. But in this context, who are the players? Stephen.
Hello, Doc. Okay, let me try. I think we have the prosecutor, Fuseni and Chia.
Okay. Well, to be honest, the prosecutor is not here at all.
Oh, okay.
We're actually playing this game, like you said. Fuseni and Chia. So that's it. These are the players. The next thing is the strategy. The strategy. What are the strategies? And this again is determined from the question. What are the strategies that, okay, so by the way, this is the players, okay? What are the strategies that these guys are going to have? What are the strategies? And you can see those strategies in the storyline. It is all in there in the storyline. Who can tell us? So by strategies with me, what are they going to do? McLean?
Yes, either by confessing or not confessing.
Exactly. The strategies are confess or not confess. Those are the strategies. And each player in this context has to play that strategy. Okay. So you have that confess or not confess. The last one are the payoffs. What is the payoffs? What are the payoffs? Okay. Whether or not you confess or anything, eventually what are going to be the payoffs? Okay, let me give it to Denisa.
The number of years that need to be.
Okay, so what remains to this payoff?
That is the number of years, the negative punishment given them.
All right. So I need a different answer. What is the actual payoff? Kajitan.
Yes, sir. Can we say the number of years in jail?
Forget about the word jail now. Okay. Sorry, forget about the number, because there are different numbers for it. So generally, what are the jail sentence? The jail sentence. Okay. So your ability to be able to understand these first three are important. Okay. A jail sentence and our prison sentence. So the years in jail is a, now, even though it is called payoff, do you realize that it's a negative payoff? Yeah, it's a negative payoff. So every time you need to remember to identify these three aspects of the strategic environment. Any question on that? The next thing, so the strategic environment is always easy. The next thing is you need to now understand who the players are. Now in this context, how many are the players? How many are the players? We've already established that the players are how many? There are two. Okay. Now I'm going to draw the way you got to structure these players. Okay. I'm going to just show how you got to structure them. So you have something like a box, like that. And this one here, you have a player who is a role player. And you have another player who is a column player. Okay. So you need to have the role player, and then you need to have the column player. Now the role player, I'm going to use the name there. This is a role player. And this role player is usually the player one. And then you have the column player, the column. And this column player is usually the player 2. That's what you have there. Now, after indicating this, you now need to indicate the strategies and then the payoffs. So when you are drawing the box, the first thing you need to indicate are the names of the players, which are on the extremes. Then you need to indicate the strategies that each player is playing. And finally, you need to indicate the payoffs. The payoffs. So the payoffs is going to be inside. So this section is the player's name. Then we will have a section like this and that. And there will be the strategies. And then you can now have a section like this and that. And they will be the payoffs. So the payoffs are going to be what you guys talk about as a return. You're going to learn something about these payoffs pretty soon. Because I'm going to teach you something for you to be able to do that. Okay. So the payoffs are going to be like the utility game. So the strategies, now, somebody told us the strategies. So in this very context, okay, in this very context, player 1 will be what? Player 1 is going to be who? Let me put it that way. Player 1 is good. And normally, let me just take you back to the storyline. Normally, the one whose name comes first, that person is the one we are going to write. So player 1 will be who? And player 2 will be who? Can tell us. Who is going to be the player 1? Ebenezer.
Dr. Husseini.
Husseini. And then player 2 will be Chia. Whilst I'm drawing, try and do the same thing. Okay. So you're going to write, and I'm going to just use that to rewrite the whole thing. Okay. So I'm going to rewrite the whole thing here and indicate that this guy here is Husseini. So you write the full name of that player there. And then on the top section there, the name of the player is going to be Chia. So once again, when you get there, you indicate that and then you write the name of the player, Chia. And you remember that we indicated that the next thing is a strategy. So here we're going to have something like strategy. I'm just representing it like this. Now, Husseini had a strategy. The strategies are going to be either what or what. Who can tell me? The strategies were either what or what. That's, raise your hand and tell me. I can't see you. I can't see you, but when you raise your hand, I can see you. Yes, Mark.
Confess or not to confess.
Good. So I'm going to say Husseini does don't confess or confess. Okay. And then Chia will have don't confess and then confess. I'm just using these letters to represent it. After this, the next thing are the payoffs or the actual numerical values that those players had. And the actual numerical values that the players had, for you to be able to get that, let's go to the story. Now remember, we are going to have the values here to be 2. The first value, I'm going to write something and edit it. The first value, comma, and the second value. The first value, comma, and the second value. And Guy, the way you identify these first values and second values are important. Now the first value, take note, is always for the row player, the player on the left. The first number is for the row player. The second number in the payoffs is for the column player. So always remember, the first number is for the row player. The first number is for the row player. So I'm underlining the role player's numbers. And the second number is always for the column player. I think this is clear because we want to understand this very quickly. Okay. So keep that in mind. You have the role player and then you have the column player. Okay. Role player, then the column player. Now I'm going to now proceed into working with you to identify these peculiar guys. So let's go to the storyline again. Let's go to the storyline. Because the story will tell you which number goes to where. So look at the story. Okay, you got a story there. And the story says, if neither confesses, the prosecutor will be unable to convict them of the crime and each suspect will receive a 1-year jail sentence. So where do you think that will be? This statement that we just made, where do you think that is going to be? You can raise a hand and walk me through that. And when you have raised a hand, you tell me, yes, Ebenezer, I saw your hand.
The first column, that is the not confessing for the two of them.
DC, that's what you mean?
Yes, Doc.
Okay, the first number will be what?
1.
So you write 1 here, and then the second number?
1.
Good, thank you. You are right. Okay. So we are good to go with our first sentence. Let's go to the second, any section we want to now talk about. You have if Fuseni confesses and Chia does not, then Fuseni will go free, Chia receive 50. Okay. If both confess, then each gets. Ebenezer, always mute yourself when you're done, okay? It's a very, very professional way. Now, if both confess, then each gets an immediate 6-year sentence. Each suspect must decide once under these conditions whether confess or not. So who can tell me which space he wants to now put what numbers? Who can tell me which space to put what numbers? Who is ready to tell me about the next? Maclay.
Yes, sir.
Maclay, let me open this thing. Okay, so tell me, DC, or
I want to put CC.
DC, good. What numbers are
6.
6, and then 6. That's it. That is when both confess. Very good. So the first 6 is for the Fuseni. The second 6 is for Chia. Next one. Who can tell us the next one without even going to the storyline? Who can tell us what is supposed to be a DCC? That junction for DC and C. DC and C, unison.
So 0 and negative 15.
0 and then negative 15. Oh, then everything has to be negative. Yes. Negative 15. I agree with you. Now, what about C and DC? What about C and DC? You can tell us the payoffs for that. What is the payoffs for C and DC? Looking at the storyline. That is when Fuseni confesses this one is wrong. This one is wrong. Let me just delete it before. The one that Eunice you spoke about is wrong. Eunice, the one you wrote is wrong. So let's go to another person. Janet, which one are you doing?
Yes, Doc. If Fuseni confesses and Chia doesn't confess,
just choose the column for me.
DC will be
this
0.
Choose the space for me. Which one are you dealing with? Yeah.
CDC.
CDC. It will be what?
Yes. That's when Fuseni confesses and Chia doesn't confess.
It becomes what?
0 and negative 15.
Okay. So this one becomes 0, then negative 15. What about this one? The DC.
Then that one would be negative 15 and 0.
Good. Negative 15 and then 0. That's how it's supposed to be. Your ability, what you've just done is known as the matrix form. There's another name for it. So this is a matrix form of presenting the information. It's also called the normal form. And it's also called the strategic form. So please note, the matrix, normal, strategic form, the same. This is how you do the representation of the information pattern. Okay, so let me show you all that we've done so far. Okay, now in the one I have here, it is positive, but the same principle will go. So don't worry much about it. And the details of the game is that that's what one of you was trying to explain. If you say it confesses shares and both get 6 years, then on and on and on. Okay. Now, in a game theory, there is a concept you must know, and there are 2 more concepts you got to understand. The first concept you got to know is a dominant strategy. A dominant strategy. Now, before I explain it fully to you, I want to take you back here, and I want to show you something on this information here, top left here. So I'm going to give you this strategy. These are strategies, A, B, and then C. Okay. So these A, B, and C, we are going to put some payoffs there. And I want you to see these payoffs as millions of dollars. So you got $4 million and then $6 million. You got $8 million and then $2 million. And then you got $8 million and then $6 million. Let me change this one slightly. And there's a reason why I'm changing it slightly. I'm changing this one slightly because let's make this one. Let me delete this first. Let's make this one $7 million. Then make this one $9 million. Good. So I want you to watch this. This is strategy A, this is strategy B, and then we have strategy C and all that. Now I want you to look at these strategies. If you look at the strategy A, number 4 is for player 1, and number 6 is for player 2. Okay, so number 4 here is for player 1, number 6 is for player 2. It's a strategy. Now, if you look at player B, the strategies are 8 and 7 and C 8 and 9. Now, if you look at player A, throughout all of these 3 strategies, okay, and the payoffs that come with it, if you look at player 1, which of the strategies is he going to be enjoying? Is it A, B, or C? Remember, player 1 will always focus on the first number. So that player 1, which of them strategies do you think he's going to be focusing on? A, B, or C? You can tell me. A, B, or C? For player 1. For player 1. Okay. Eventually, he's going to settle. Yes, McClare.
Yeah, for option B.
Well, technically, it wouldn't be option B because option B, the value there is 8. And it's that same option B, 8, which is also in C. And so we will say that that player A will be settling for either B or C. He'll be indifferent between the 2. But for player A, for sure, he will go for what? Player A, for sure, will go for what? Player A, for a positive return, a positive utility, he will for sure go for what? I want someone to Because once you're able to crack it, it means that you know exactly what you're doing. For player B, remember, player B has a choice of either 6 or 7 or 9. So he'll go for 9. Okay, and so for player B, he's going to select for C. Okay, now, so on the basis of this, we can say that C is a dominant strategy. Now, I'm using the word dominant here to refer to all of them put together. C is great because C is going to give you $8 million and $9 million. And that option, that outcome is better than all the other outcomes for both players. Now, we know that for player B, for player A, the strategy B, the outcome B wouldn't be a big deal. So for him, B or C, he's okay with either of them. But we can't say the same thing for player 2. For player 2, you can't say that he's indifferent between B and C. He wants 9 million than 7 million. So for him, he's going to go for 9 million. And since for player 1, he doesn't care whether it is B or C, he will go for the C. And so we can say that C is a dominant strategy. C is a dominant strategy. Okay. What is a dominant strategy? A dominant strategy is the one a player is happy to commit to playing without knowing what the other opponent is going to do. So I am committed to playing the strategy A or B or C. I'm committed to playing D. I'm committed to playing D. I'm committed to playing D. I'm stuck at playing D. I'm stuck at playing D. I'm stuck at playing D. I don't care what's going to happen. I don't care what you are going to do. I am fixated at playing D. So D now becomes my dominant. It becomes my dominant strategy. In other words, whatever the other guys choose, that strategy is going to be optimal for me. So if one strategy dominates all other strategies, that strategy is said to be a dominant strategy. It's not a matter of it's a strategy that dominates another. No. It is a dominant strategy because among all of the ones that dominate, it is the one that is dominant. And later on, you're going to learn that whenever a strategy is dominant for both players, then there is an equilibrium. There is a pure strategy Nash equilibrium. I'll come back to that. Now, for you to understand a dominant strategy, we want to compare it with a dominating and a dominated strategy. A dominating and a dominated strategy. Now, when do we say a strategy is dominating or dominated? Well, we only use those terminologies if we are talking about two strategies at a point in time. So let's go back to our example, and let's assume that I'm talking about the strategy between strategy A and then strategy C. So strategy A is 4 and then 6. And strategy C is 8 and then 9. Which of these two strategies is dominated? And which one is dominant? Sorry, which one is dominating? You see, I'm using the word dominating to indicate because we are talking about two strategies at a point in time. Now, the dominated strategy is the one that has not gotten a better payoff compared to the other. So if you look at strategy A, if I compare for number 4 against number 8, player 1 will go for number 8. So the player 1 will go for C. If I compare number 6 against number 9, player 2 will go for 9. And so player 2 will go for C. And so on the basis of that, I can say that C is dominating A, and A is dominated by C. Guys, you understand that? C is dominating A, and A is dominated by C. Now I want us to go to the top and go and compare B and C. B and C. Which one is dominated and which one is dominating? You can tell us. B and C. Which one is dominated? Which one is dominating? Anybody? B and C. Yes, Stephen Morrison.
Doc, please, C is dominating and B is being dominated by C.
A and B at the top.
A and B. Okay, so that one, B is dominating. Then A is being dominated by B.
Okay. Now, what about B and C? What about B and C? Who can tell us? B and C. Michael.
Doc, B is being dominated, whereas C is dominating.
Good.
Is dominating B, yeah.
Good. So B, and the reason why that is so is that it is player 2 who made a change. It's player 2 who made that change possible. Now let me ask you, let me trick you small. Let's assume that the value here was 7. Let's assume that the value for C was not 9, but it was 7. Which will be dominated and which will be dominating? You can raise your hand and tell me. Which one will be dominated? Which one will be dominating? Kwame, Ebenezer.
Look, none.
Sorry?
None of them.
Exactly. It's none of them. It's none of them. And the reason why that is so is because they've got the same payoff. So neither dominates the other. But then, even though comparing C and B, C is dominating. Okay, let's go back to our 9. Okay. Comparing C and B, C is dominating. Comparing C and A, C is dominating. That is why C becomes dominant. That's why C becomes dominant. So a dominant strategy is a strategy that dominates a dominated strategy. Does it make sense? Should I repeat that? A dominant strategy is a strategy that dominates all other dominating and dominated strategies. I've even changed it. A dominant strategy is that strategy that dominates all other dominating and dominated strategies. Does it make sense? Because before you can become a dominant strategy, you must have been a dominating strategy. But there may be other dominating strategies, but you dominate those ones. And so that is what made you a dominant strategy. I think it's clear. So on the basis of this, let's now go back to our entire story. I want you to tell me this strategy. Now, if you look at the payoffs that I'm showing you here, look at the payoffs very carefully. Okay. Which player are we considering? Is it for player 1 or for player 2 we are considering in this chart? Does it look like we are considering player 1 or player 2? If you look at this, you can tell me. Are we considering player 1 or we are considering player 2? Mike? Player 1, sir. How do you know?
Because of the position of this on the column.
The position of
player 1 is, we always say player 1's position will always be first.
Player 1's payoff, that's the word I wanted to use. Use the word payoff so that you get used to it. Because the payoffs that comes is for the payoffs on the left. Yes. So that's why we know that it is. Okay, so now looking at for player 1. Okay. Can you tell me this answer? Look at for player 1. Which is the dominated strategy? The strategies are strategy T and strategy B. Which one is dominated? Remember, I'm talking about dominated. Which of these two strategies is dominated for player 1? Stephen?
Doc, please, T. Strategy T is dominated.
Okay. Stephen, you didn't understand all that we did. So that is wrong. Now let's try and correct it. Who can explain why that was wrong? It cannot be. I said dominated. If you look at for strategy T, it was having 1. And for strategy B, it was having 0. So you are comparing the 1 and the 0. And when you look at the 1 and the 0, B is dominated. When you go and look at the next 2 numbers in the next 2 cells, T is having 5 and B is having 4. Which one is dominated? It's B. So in all cases, you can see that B is dominated. B is dominated by T. B for boy is dominated because the payoffs in B are smaller than the payoffs in T. Remember, you're looking at the rows. You're looking at the rows, and you can see that 1 is bigger than 0 and 5 is bigger than 4. Okay, so keep that in mind. Keep that strictly in mind. So that is B. Next one. So let's go back to our prisoner's dilemma that we did. Okay, this is our prisoner's dilemma. Look at it carefully now. And this is exactly what we wrote. Don't confess and confess and all of that. Whether they are negative or positive, it wouldn't make a significant difference. But if you want to keep them in your mind as negative, keep it in your mind as negative. If not, keep it in your mind as positive. So let's go to our question. Yes, Dr. Morrison.
Hello, Doc. So please, with the previous payoffs, so if the question had been, which one is the dominant strategy, then it would have been the T instead, please. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. All right.
Okay, so now on the basis of this, what is a dominant strategy in this prisoner's dilemma? Now, before you can calculate the dominant strategy, you need to check whether Fuseni has a dominant strategy. Then when you finish, consider whether Shia has a dominant strategy. Because if you don't consider them one by one and you jump out, you'll be quite difficult. So, does Fuseni have a dominant strategy? Well, does Chia have a dominant strategy? Now, before I can do this, you have to be careful about the columns. So look at Fuseni. Okay. If Fuseni, this is how you normally do it. I'm now going to consider whether Fuseni has a dominant strategy. Okay. If you are considering whether Fuseni has a dominant strategy here, if that's your condition, if that's your thing you're considering, then you have to speak as if Chia is acting first. So we are going to consider whether Fuseni has a dominant strategy. All right, okay. So then let's consider what Chia does first. If Chia does not confess, that means we are here. If Chia doesn't confess, guys, look at that column there. What do you think Fuseni would do? Looking at the payoffs for Fuseni. If Chia doesn't confess, looking at the payoffs, what do you think Fuseni would do? You can tell me. If Chia doesn't confess, what would Fuseni do? Fuseni is going to not confess. Because if Fuseni chooses not confess, he will get 1, okay, instead of confess and get 2. But that is because I'm considering this thing as what? As a negative value. Sorry, a positive value. So I want us to now keep the minuses in front of them. Okay. If we keep the minuses in front of them, it's going to be, so guys, let's put it this way, in order not to get confused. Okay. Let's assume that even though these are prison sentences, bigger values are better. This is just for you to understand them. Okay. Bigger values are better. Okay. If that will confuse you, let me know. And then I'll just change them and make it like minuses. So bigger values are better. So let's say, even though these are jail sentences, you don't want to look at them as jail sentences, but you want to look at them as the utility you gain for going or not going for the jail sentence. Okay, so if Chia doesn't confess, then Fuseni won't confess and get 1 because 1 is positively better than 0. 1 is better than 0. Or let's even look at them as negatives. Okay, let's look at them as let's look at them as negative or as it is. Okay, so Chia doesn't confess. Let's consider that smaller values are better. Smaller values are better. So Chia doesn't confess. If Chia doesn't confess, which means we are in this column, then Fuseni will confess and get 0 because 0 sentence is better than 1. Does that make sense? Are you fine with that? 0 is better than 1. Now, so we know that Fuseni is going to confess. The question now we need to ask ourselves is whether he's going to maintain that. And if he maintains that in our next level, then Fuseni has a dominant strategy. So we go to when Chia is confessing. If Chia is confessing, what do you think Fuseni would do? Looking at the 15 for Fuseni and 6, Fuseni would confess and get a 6 jail sentence instead of a 15 jail sentence. So you can see that Fuseni has maintained his confession when Chia wasn't confessing and has kept that when Chia was even confessing. So Fuseni is maintaining. The moment you keep doing whatever you are doing, you maintain that you're stuck to that. Irrespective of what your opponent is doing, we say you have a dominant strategy. Does it make sense? So we now can prove that Fuseni has what? A dominant strategy. That's the first thing. Okay. That point I made is what is here. Fuseni has a strictly dominant strategy. Now let's go to the Chia. Now, because I'm not going to consider Chia, I now have to assume what Fuseni does first. So here, I'm going to consider Chia. And because of that, I'm going to now see what Fuseni does and what Chia will do. If Fuseni doesn't confess, we are here. If Fuseni doesn't confess, okay, which is this level, then what do you think Chia will do? Well, Chia can choose not to confess and get 1, or Chia can choose to confess and get 0. Which one do you think Chia will do? Chia will confess and will get 0 because 0 is better. 0 jail sentence is better than 1 year. You can see that I'm selecting the values on the right. Okay. So on the basis of that, I can say that this guy, the one that will go for is confess. And let's see whether he's going to maintain that. Let's assume that Fuseni now confesses instead of previously when he wasn't confessing. Fuseni now confesses. What do you think Chia will do? Well, if Chia should confess, if Chia doesn't confess, he's going to get this jail sentence of 15 years. And then if he chooses to confess, he's going to get what? He's going to get 6 years, which is shorter jail sentence. And so Chia has a dominant strategy. The reason why we say he's got a dominant strategy is because he's maintaining his confession. He's maintaining it, okay, on that section there. So we can say without a doubt that Chia has a dominant strategy. And we can also say without a doubt that Fuseni has a dominant strategy. Both of them, their dominant strategy is what? Confess, confess. So you were asked the question, what is the dominant strategy in this prisoner's dilemma? Okay. The dominant strategy is for both of them to what? To confess. That is what we mean by a dominant strategy. Now, let's go to the equilibrium. Okay. By the way, any question here? Any question on this so far?